Hello and welcome to The Last Word. Does the successful handling of Cyclone Phailin prove that the Indian system can work effectively when the right people are in charge? My guests are the Vice Chairman of the National Disaster Management Authority, M. Shashidhar Reddy, the Director General of the Indian Meteorological Department, L.S. Rathore, and Biju Janata Dal Lok Sabha Leader, Jai Panda. Gentlemen, let's try and identify the key elements that made the handling of Cyclone Phailin so successful. First, Jai Panda, would you accept that perhaps the most important measure was the evacuation of over 9 lakh people, thus ensuring that the death toll was limited to the low 20s rather than the nearly 10,000 who died in 1999?
Karan, first a quick preface. I don't want to get dragged into this unseemly scramble that seems to be happening in some quarters about who ought to get the credit. But you are absolutely right. I think the single biggest factor in containing the casualties was obviously the nearly 1 million people who were evacuated to safety. And this is the significant difference from earlier crises that we have faced in Odisha. And I would like to point out that starting with Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik, who was personally monitoring and taking preemptive measures for days before the cyclone hit, all the way down to the thousands of Odisha government officials who were involved in the evacuation, they all deserve a pat on the back. But I also want to say that national authorities who were involved, of course, also deserve a pat on the back. The Met Department for making predictions on time, the Defence Forces for keeping their resources available in Odisha, also the National Rapid Action Force which moved here.
Okay.
But most of their contribution is happening now in the relief work that we are seeing in Balesore and other places.
Gentlemen, let me make it clear, I too don't want to get into any confusion, leave aside debate over who deserves credit. I want to give credit equally to all three of you, and through the three of you, to the hundreds if not thousands who worked with you. But nonetheless, for the sake of the audience, I need to try and identify the critical elements that made this operation a collective success. And in that spirit, Mr. Shashidhar Reddy, how critical in ensuring that the evacuation happened effectively and smoothly was the accuracy of the meteorological department's forecasts of the cyclone, both in terms of the cyclone's intensity as well as in terms of the track that it took?
Well, I think that was absolutely important. I mean, everything was based on that, the kind of track, intensity, landfall. These are all important inputs that the state district administration needs in order to take, preemptive measures like this. I would also like to mention here, going back, and I think when we've handled cyclones, of course, Orissa is a one-off case, but most cyclones, particularly in Andhra, I have the experience, going back to 1990, we've been able to evacuate 650,000 people in those days, which was also a major effort. So I think by and large, when you look at Katrina, why people died is because the people did not heed to the advice of the local people.
Quite right.
And I think even now there are some lessons to be learned. There were resistance in
Can I stop you there? I'll come to the lessons in a moment's time. Let's first concentrate on the things that went absolutely right. Mr. Rathore, until they corrected themselves, both the United States Navy's Joint Typhoon Warning Center and the British Met Office were predicting a super cyclone with winds exceeding 300 kilometers. In the face of such predictions from the West, how difficult was it for you and your colleagues to stand by your assessment, which was markedly different, but ultimately completely correct?
Well, it's a big challenge, but we had confidence on our model outputs and our experience, both. And I think no one knows Indian basins better than us. So, therefore, we were confident, and therefore we stuck to the guns.
But there was a point of time when, in fact, sources in the West, I won't name them, and even some elements of the Western media were beginning to taunt the authorities in India for underplaying, perhaps deliberately underplaying the challenge. At that moment in time, were you tempted to try and upscale your forecast, or did you still stick by it, knowing that perhaps if it went wrong, it would be hugely embarrassing?
Well, let me tell you one thing, that in general, any operational weather forecaster has tendency to overplay, operational weather forecaster, because in that scenario he is more safer, both in terms of intensity and also the zone of zone of impact. But the value of information is only and only if it is more precise. And as Met Department, we are conscious of the fact that the action which has to be taken by state governments can be better only and only if you are correct to your assessment. So we kept our forecast precise, only 5 districts, and also about the intensity. And that was important, and we weighed pros and cons, everything, and having confidence and faith in our prediction systems, we stuck to the time.
Now, Jai Panda, one of the things that made that evacuation so smooth and successful was the fact that Orissa has created a network of cyclone shelters, which were not just staffed with supervisory civil servants in each case, but also provided with a week of rations in each case. How much planning went into the creation of these cyclone centers? Because I take it this is something that's been happening for 5 or 10 years, not something that happened overnight.
No, it's been happening for a dozen years, because please recall, Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik first got elected immediately after the super cyclone of 1999, which had led to a lot of public anger against the then incumbent government. So it has been his top priority for more than a dozen years. And you're right, the two infrastructure aspects which made a huge difference are the large numbers of cyclone shelters, but also the large number of village roads, concrete roads, which have come up in the last decade to 12 years. We still need a lot more of these, and focus is being kept on that. But I would also want to make a point here, that although we can keep adding to technological capabilities of prediction, please remember in 1999 also the Met Department had given us a good 3 to 4 days advance warning about the super cyclone. And yet we did not have the systemic capability at that time to make these preemptive arrangements.
All right.
So obviously this is not an overnight success story. And I also want to highlight that if you look at the many small and medium calamities Odisha has had in the last dozen years, you'll see a steady upward graph, upward trend of the state government's capabilities in evacuation and containing damage.
Now, Mr. Shashidhar Reddy, a second element, or maybe it is the third important element that emerges from the successful handling of Cyclone Phailin, is the speed with which fallen trees were cleared and highways reopened. And I get the feeling that perhaps the NDMA had made plans in advance that as soon as the storm abates, clearance teams will be out there in action. Because literally I noticed from dawn on Sunday morning, the clearance had begun.
The National Disaster Response Force, the NDRF, I think this is a fine force that has developed over the years. It has become the face of the disaster management in this country. They have excelled not only in the country but outside the country, in Japan when they went in 2011. You know, they are fully trained and equipped to carry out all these things. They have all the machinery, the equipment that is required, portable, and they undergo a very rigorous training. And then 29 teams were at the disposal of the Orissa government, and then we took a decision that, you know, they will continue to stay there to help in the relief work, not only in the rescue, because I think 6:30 on 13th morning I was checking up with the people responsible there. They were all out, and then you know, they started business, and I'm glad, you know, they've been able to help the local administration in you know, ultimately the objective of whether it is the NDRF or the local administration or any agency that is involved is to come to the rescue of the people, find them, you know, give them some comfort.
Now, Mr. Rathod, you were in a unique position of dealing with the state government, the central government, the NDMA. All of them in a sense were reliant on the forecasts that you were making and your assessment of the cyclone. Give me a sense of the coordination that existed between all these multiple agencies that had to cooperate together to ensure that Odisha's battle against the cyclone was successful. What level of coordination happened between the Meteorological Department, the NDMA, the state government, the central government, and the various defense services?
I consider this is an exemplary in a sense that all agencies were in touch with each other. I was personally speaking to Mr. M. Shashidhar Reddy maybe if not half an hour, every hour. I was in personally touch with Cabinet Secretary, personally touch with my Secretary, personally in touch with Home Secretary, personally in touch with Chief Secretaries of both the states and Chief Minister's offices, and media. As you know, Karan, we have been briefing media very frequently because we thought that information dissemination is a key element, dissemination to stakeholders as well as to public at large. And I think role of media, I would also like to mention that media was sleeping here. And all 4 nights, 3 nights, we were awake here and talking to each other.
Gentlemen, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to turn to the challenges that lie ahead. How prepared is Odisha? How prepared is the Indian system for those challenges? Restoring power, ensuring there's no disease and infection, and then much more importantly, rehabilitation, not just of buildings, but of the livelihoods of the people who are affected. All of that in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to The Last Word. We're discussing the successful handling of Cyclone Phailin. Gentlemen, let's come to the challenges that lie ahead. First, Mr. Shashidhar Reddy, 2 quick questions to you. I imagine for many people what they're waiting for is the restoration of power. Without electricity, life can be very difficult. How quickly do you think full power will be restored to coastal Odisha? I gather it's already back to large parts of Bhubaneswar.
Well, I think the problem will be mostly major problem will be in Ganjam district. A lot of the substations and distributory system has been affected, and today in the National Executive Committee meeting that was chaired by the Union Home Secretary, an assurance was given by the Power Ministry that about 100 teams would be mobilized to be sent there. So everything possible is being done by the center.
Now, a second quick question is the challenge of containing the spread of disease and infection. But given the successful evacuation and the very limited death toll, how much of a threat is the fear of infection and disease?
In a situation like this, waterborne diseases can create problems. We are in our review, the Health Ministry is in total readiness. They are waiting for any requisition from the center. But in any case, I have asked the Ministry of Health officials to depute public health teams to be in waiting in Bhubaneswar, and they will be available at the shortest possible notice. And then all the medicines that have been requisitioned by the government of Odisha, including a large quantity of chlorine and the other different kinds of tablets, crocin and all other tablets, whatever has been requested for is being supplied.
Now, Jai Panda, for the millions who are affected directly or indirectly by this horrible traumatic experience, the key issue is rehabilitation, both of buildings, but much more importantly of their livelihood. How difficult and a daunting a task is that going to prove to be?
You know, in the medium to long term, that is going to be the single biggest challenge. And I would like to highlight two areas. One is the enormous crop loss that has happened. It's ironic because this year was a good year. We'd had a good crop. And many lakhs of hectares of agricultural land have had severe damage. And then also the lakhs of homes that have been damaged of very poor people. This is the one area where we will actually require central government help, because the enormous funds that will be required for this rehabilitation package will be beyond the scope of the state government. So this is where a helping hand by the central government is going to make a huge difference.
Okay.
As far as the health risks and other things, many preemptive steps have been taken, such as positioning doctors and medicines in all these districts ahead of time. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and I'm cautiously optimistic that there too the damage will be contained. But it's the medium to long term reconstruction where we need help.
Mr. Rathore, I want to turn to the future, if I may, in the brief time left to us. Let me ask you a simple question. In your eyes, what made the critical difference between the dismal response in June in Uttarakhand and the rather successful response in October in Orissa? Was it that this time around all the authorities not only took the forecast from the IMD seriously but responded expeditiously, whereas there were major concerns in June that your advance warnings had fallen on pretty close to deaf ears?
Actually, these meteorological events are altogether different, different in the sense that cyclone we do get a very fair amount of time, and you get better forewarning, and also you can prepare on the ground while disaster is approaching you. That is one of the aspects. Number two, here you can translate weather forecast into actionable advisories. And for example, release of water from Hirakund, which was done in this event, and public would even know that as to what has gone into it. Otherwise, had not this action been taken, it could have been disastrous. There are large amount of decisions which can be taken in advance if you really have a better information. Uttarakhand is a difficult terrain, and it was not purely, though it triggered with heavy rainfall, but its compounding impact of so many other parameters and difficult terrain to work. You can imagine the difficulties of disaster managers in operating in that area.
All right, I take your very well delivered diplomatic point that it's possibly unfair to compare the two. And yet, as you know, the world is an unfair place, and those comparisons are certainly being made. But I underline the point you made. Do not compare the two. Let's instead learn lessons from Orissa and hope that we handle all such possible potential disasters when they loom ahead with the same efficiency and success. My thanks to all three of my guests for joining me. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.